What's going on, guys? Hope you guys are doing well. Today we're going to be taking a look at my dividend portfolio. So I've got about 20 stocks in here, and most of them are pretty defensive. There's a couple in here that are more growth oriented, but for the most part, this is where I keep money that I want in the shorter term, but not short enough to just let it sit in cash. So kind of protect it a little bit against inflation. So to get right into it, you can see the first one up is Intuit. Most of you guys are probably familiar with Intuit for their tax services, both for TurboTax, but also for the small business side, QuickBooks, and they have a couple other products, but those are their main popular items. Now, currently pays only a yield of 0.63%. It's one of the lowest ones in my entire dividend portfolio. Kind of the logic behind this is more of a dividend growth play. If you take a look at their 5-year dividend growth, 15%. So, we're hoping that this is going to be a nice yield on cost over time. You can see from 2015 to 2019, it increased by almost $1. So as we see this dividend increase over time, it's just a solid play for a long-term growth. If you're patient and you're willing to hold on to things for a while, you can get a nice yield out of it. But I acknowledge that it's not the biggest dividend play. It's a little untraditional, but long-term I think it's going to be a good pick. It's also a rather defensive industry. People are always going to have to pay taxes. Next up is NextEra Energy. So this is a clean energy company. I own them in a couple of my other accounts for the clean energy play, but in this scenario it's kind of a mix. So I'm looking to play on that clean energy, and I'm anticipating the stock will appreciate, but it also does pay a 2% dividend, and it has a decent dividend growth history. You can see its 5-year growth aggregate is 12.5%, which is pretty solid. So the company's still growing, and then hopefully it starts to develop from a price appreciation perspective also as green energy gets pumped. I know Biden actually just came out today with this plan that he wants for infrastructure, and I think there's a couple $100 billion set aside, assuming it gets passed, set aside just for clean energy initiatives and credits, which is going to help stocks like these a lot. So next up we got AbbVie. So you can see here another excellent 5-year dividend growth rate, 18.09%. But the nice thing about this one is they actually already pay a pretty nice yield. So you're not going to get a ton of price appreciation out of a stock like this. You can see the chart looks a little crazy, but it's only up, I guess it's doubled since 2016, so I shouldn't say that it hasn't appreciated. But for the past 4 years or so, it's been either relatively flat or you've lost money from a stock price perspective. But that 5% dividend makes up for it, in my opinion. And down here when it gets down to $60-$70, that yield increases because the dividend has remained consistent for the past however long. That's something like an 8% dividend, which is pretty meaty. But as I saw before, really solid dividend growth rate over the past 5 years. You can see dividends and REITs are split up. So there's typically a qualified portion that you pay normal dividend tax rates at, and then there's an unqualified portion, which is going to be the bulk of what REITs pay out as dividends. So it's not taxed on their side. They get to pass it off to you without them taxing it. But on the flip side, you have to pay tax at your normal income rate. So you can see dividend growth rate, again, excellent. 20% aggregate growth over the past 5 years. And that's annualized. You can see it's paying a $2 dividend back in 2015. Now we're sitting up at $4.53. And this is a rather defensive business. Currently pays about a 2% yield. Their business is cell towers, obviously, which I think is just going to increase because 5G requires a lot more towers for decent coverage and strength, for signal strength. So I think we're just going to continue to see an increase in the number of towers that go up over the next decade or two. Next up, ADP. So this is a payment provider. Some of the companies I've worked for in the past use them for payroll. When you see like jobs reports come out a lot, of the time when you see jobs reports come out, it's the ADP numbers sometimes that they're referring to. So currently paying a 2% dividend, which is, alright. But if we go to dividend growth, we see a 12.5% 5-year aggregate growth annualized. Again, pretty solid. We're really targeting, companies with a medium dividend that are both price appreciating and growing their dividends steadily, or companies with a flatter stock but that pay a higher yield and still have decent growth. You can see back in 2015 it was paying $2 a share, and now we're up to $3.66. Again, pretty defensive business. Not going to get disrupted too easily. Most companies don't want to handle their own payroll. So next up, this is one I've talked about in the past, is Medical Properties Trust. This is another REIT. So again, the taxation issue, but this one has pretty low growth in terms of the dividend, and I've kind of got a soft spot for it because I've owned it for a long time, and I bought it, when it was around $15, $16, when the yield was, 7 or 8%. So I don't mind as much, since I'm just parking my money here. I don't mind as much that they're not growing the dividend. The stock also does grow a little bit more than your traditional. So you can see 10 years ago it was $11. Now it's pushing 21. Pre-COVID it was 23. Currently pays a 5.3% yield. So, pretty solid defensive play. The nice thing about them is that they own hospital properties, but none of the office crap. It's all like intensive care, like actual hospitals, no doctor's offices or medical billing offices like some of the other medical REITs have. It's a pretty pure play. The only thing I don't love is that they have a lot of properties overseas in like Germany, and I'm not too familiar with the climate there. Especially they have different economic circumstances, but I do like the company overall. And next up we got Visa. Everyone knows Visa. I'm just going to cover both of them here. You see I have Visa here, and then I also have MasterCard down here. They're both really similar. They pay about a 0.6% dividend, but they have really solid dividend growth. Let's see, Visa is 19%, again, excellent. And MasterCard's basically the same story. So I'm kind of just targeting that dividend growth long term here. And I definitely believe in Visa and MasterCard, their cash flow and just their margins in general are ridiculous. They have like 40-50% profit margins. Next up, we got Unilever. It's a consumer products company. If you're not familiar with them, this is actually an ADR because it is not a US stock. So, again, low 5-year dividend growth rate. This is one I kind of just picked up to round out my portfolio a little bit in terms of sectors because I had a lot of exposure into the tech side of things as well as REITs. So this is, it's a decent name, and I also think that they're pushing the boundary a little bit more in terms of the shift to renewables in terms of like packaging for consumer products and packaging for food. They've had some pretty neat designs out of there. I work in manufacturing, so I see a lot of this stuff, and that's just kind of the consensus that I've seen. It's just my opinion, so take it with a grain of salt. Next up, we have L3 Harris. So, this is going to be more along your like industrial technology building, like defense stocks, kind of similar to Lockheed Martin. You can see it pays a 2% yield right now. Stock has increased, but I guess that's a pretty solid growth. Flat for the past year or so, but the longer term growth from the stock price appreciation has been pretty solid. Again, 13% about 5-year aggregate growth rate. Really solid, really solid. Next up, TD, Toronto Dominion. This is not TD Ameritrade. Do not confuse it with TD Ameritrade. 5-year growth rate of 9%. Not as good as some of the others, but when I purchased this about a month ago, it was kind of before the banking stocks came back a little bit. I think I purchased in January, February. Yeah, around the $58, $57 mark. It was about a 4% yield, which is pretty solid. It's basically the same thing in my mind. Get something with a 4% yield that's growing 9% a year. Dividends growing 9% a year, or you take something with a 2% yield that's growing 20% a year. Like, they're both going to provide pretty decent dividend appreciation in the longer term. Next up, we got Iron Mountain. This is another REIT. This is it's kind of a combo because traditionally they've been, your storage for companies' paper documents and, backups, but they've also moved into the data center and data backup business. So it's kind of a combination play, getting into the data center space, which I really like. Pays a 6.66% dividend. It's pretty high because people are a little weary about, we're moving to a paperless society. Will they be able to, transfer their business into the data center side enough to account for the lost revenue of the paper business? And you can see dividend growth here. We got about 5.2%. 10 years looking pretty nice though. So, decent play. I'm in it for the high yield. Next up, we got DLR. It's another data center play, another REIT actually. You can see this one is a lot lower of a yield at 3.3%, pretty low for a REIT, and that's because it's in a hot sector. Data centers are a hot sector right now, and they're also managed pretty well, and they've had pretty consistent growth in stock price appreciation, which pushes down things like yield as the price creeps up. People are willing to pay a premium for something that's managed better. So you can see they aren't even growing their dividend at a crazy rate, but the stock price appreciation stock as well as its sector. Kind of translates to that higher premium that it's trading at, but I like the sector. They're reliable, and I see them going up in the future, so that's why we're in them. Again, I'm skipping MasterCard here, because we already talked about them, basically the same thing as Visa. And next up we got Prologis, another REIT. If you'll notice, I'm a pretty big fan of REITs. This has only a 2.3% yield. Again, managed really well, really defensive business. I actually did a full video on them in the past, if you guys are interested in it. They have customers like Amazon, BMW. They're essentially these high-tech warehouses for fulfillment and distribution centers. So defensive business, everyone's moving to e-commerce. It's especially booming right now, which is kind of why the yield got pushed down. But they've also had a pretty phenomenal price appreciation. You can see, it was less than $50 5 years ago. So again, not the best dividend growth rate, but it's a steady grower and the price appreciates. So that kind of makes up for it in my mind. Again, and I like this sector. Next up we got Medtronic, which is a medical device company. 5-year dividend growth rate of about 9%. Not the best, and its yield is only about 2%. I kind of wanted to get something else in the pharmaceutical manufacturing and medical device sector, just to kind of round out the portfolio a little bit. I also just like their company, and they've put out consistent products. They have good R&D turnover. So manageable payout ratio, decent dividend yield growth, 9% is good as well, and they're also a dividend aristocrat, I believe. Looks like they've grown their dividend for 42 consecutive years. Next up, another dividend aristocrat, I believe. This is Realty Income Corporation, ticker symbol O. I guess they're not a dividend aristocrat because they've only increased it for 24 years, but this is another REIT. This is one of the kings of dividend REITs, especially for retail space. The yield is decent. It's a little higher than some of these other ones we've been talking about because they have a little bit of exposure to things like retail shopping space, and I believe they have a little bit of movie theaters, but it's not a huge chunk of their portfolio. A lot of their other stuff is in things like gas stations. I think 7-Eleven is a big part of their portfolio. They have a lot of 7-Eleven locations, CVS, Walgreens, Walmart, those type of stores, those type of triple net long-term leases. People also like this stock because it is a monthly dividend payer. Not that that really affects the total amount paid, but some people like getting that on a monthly basis. And I guess if you're using DRIP and you're reinvesting those dividends, monthly compounding will add up quicker. Next up, Verizon. Got a yield of 4.3% right now. This is not a big grower in terms of price, and I don't even think they've been increasing their dividend at a crazy rate. You can see it's a really flat stock. But that's what you get with a big blue chip stock. Yeah, that's kind of abysmal for dividend growth. But again, exposure to this telecom market that we think is going to grow, it's really steady, really steady. And that dividend is covered. So that's kind of why it's in here. Pretty boring. Next up we got Main Street Capital. This is a BDC REIT. Rather high yield. So this is a REIT that loans out debt to smaller companies. I think their target is companies with I want to say it's revenues within 1 to 10 million, and they either just make money off of the actual loans that they loan out, or they take stakes in the company and then they offload the stake or stock later on COVID situation. This is actually one that I had going into COVID, and I scared myself half to death because I had it in like the $42 range I think I bought, and then this thing dropped all the way down to like $14, and luckily I had the sense to just load up, and I doubled my position in terms of shares at like between like 15 and like $22. I added a ton of shares and then got back up to like 34, and I unloaded all those secondary shares, and then I think I just ended up selling them all off in the low 30s, but I made back my money and more just from doubling up. And then I decided to repurchase like a month or two ago when it seemed like things were flattening out. Interest rates is also something that you have to keep an eye on with them. But let's see, higher dividend yield. I don't remember what their growth's like. Not good. 0.33% 5-year dividend yield. Appreciation 10 years at 5%. Pretty abysmal. I think they had to reduce. Typically they pay monthly dividends, but there's also 2 like bonus dividends each 6 months apart. So this past year, because of COVID, they kept the monthly dividends, but they cut the bonus dividends, which is why you'll see the dividend decrease here. That also spooked a lot of people off. And honestly, that's probably what's screwing the yield growth from this last year where they cut it, because that just makes a poor average. Next up, B&G Food. I've talked about them before. This is just a steady player. I'm surprised that they're up so much this year. That's kind of crazy. I guess people playing off COVID on the supermarket runs. But 6% yield, you can see over the long term, not the best price appreciation. But, with the 6% dividend, looks like we got a 5.4% aggregate 5-year growth. 10-year growth is looking at like 10.1%, which is pretty solid. But the dividend yield is honestly already pretty high for them, so, I'm pretty happy with where they're at. Not one of my favorite names, and I could end up trimming them, but we'll see what happens. And last but not least, JP Morgan. So, banking stocks have made a run in the past week or two because of some new legislation about the margin requirements that banks have to have, something that Biden's been responsible for. So it's performed pretty well from a price perspective standpoint. Only a 2.33% yield now because of that. And really solid dividend growth there. You can see the 5-year growth is at 15.39%, 10 years at 24.57%. So really solid growth there. So that's my portfolio, guys. I don't actually have any cash left in this account, so I think the transactions I did just haven't hit yet, which would remove this. But after that happens, basically all these positions are about 5% of this account, and I'm just looking to contribute to this on a regular basis. I'm going to turn on reinvestment of all the dividends. Just let this baby ride. Thank you guys for watching. If you have any thoughts or video ideas, feel free to drop them down in the comments. I'm always happy to listen. And I'll see you guys around. Thank you.